The frequency illusion. You learn a new word, and within days you begin to hear it everywhere. You decide to buy a particular car, and suddenly that exact model seems to fill every road. It feels uncanny, almost as though your noticing of the thing has somehow caused it to multiply in the world around you. This is the frequency illusion, sometimes called the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, and it is one of the most common glitches in the way we perceive patterns. The truth is that the thing you noticed has not actually become more common. The new word was always being used at roughly the same rate. The car was always on the roads in the same numbers. What has changed is not the world, but your attention. Before you encountered the thing, your brain filtered out every instance of it as irrelevant noise. After you encountered it, the thing became meaningful, and your brain flagged it as worthy of notice. You are now seeing what was always there, but which you were previously trained to ignore. The frequency illusion rests on two cooperating mental processes. The first is selective attention. Once something becomes relevant to you, your brain quietly begins to scan for it, picking it out from the background. This scanning happens automatically, beneath conscious notice, which is why the resulting sightings feel like spontaneous coincidences rather than the product of a search you did not know you were conducting. The second process is confirmation. Each time you encounter the thing again, the encounter feels significant. You do not keep track of all the times you do not encounter it, which would correct the impression. You only register the hits, and the hits accumulate into a feeling of strange abundance. What makes this glitch so persuasive is that it produces a powerful and entirely false sense of meaning. The repeated sightings feel like they must mean something, like the universe is trying to tell you something, but the pattern is an artifact of your own attention. You created it by noticing, and then you discovered it as though it had been placed there by some outside force. The mind generates the very pattern it then marvels at. The frequency illusion has practical consequences. It can make us believe that a problem we have just become aware of is suddenly spreading, when in fact we have only just begun to notice it. It can make a coincidence feel like destiny. Understanding the illusion is a small but valuable defense against being misled by our own attention. The next time the world seems to be conspiring to show you the same thing again and again, you can recognize the feeling for what it is, not a message from reality, but a quiet trick of the mind, noticing what it has only just learned to see. The TROXLER effect. Fix your gaze on a single point and hold it perfectly still, and something strange begins to happen at the edges of your vision. The colors and shapes in your peripheral view start to fade, to dissolve, to melt quietly into the background until they vanish altogether. A colored dot in the corner of your eye simply disappears, even though it is still physically there. This gentle vanishing is called the TROXLER effect, and it reveals a fundamental principle about how perception is built, not on what is constant, but on what changes. The effect works because of a quirk in the way our nervous system handles steady, unchanging input. Neurons throughout the perceptual system are designed to respond to change. When a signal remains exactly the same for too long, the neurons that report it begin to adapt, to reduce their firing, to stop bothering to announce information that is not changing. This makes excellent sense because in the natural world, the things that matter most are usually the things that move and appear and shift. A perfectly stationary stimulus carries little urgent information, and the brain learns to tune it out. Normally, we never notice this adaptation because our eyes are never truly still. Even when we believe we are staring fixedly at a single point, our eyes are making tiny, continuous, involuntary movements, jittering in microscopic increments. These minute movements constantly refresh the image on the retina, shifting it slightly so that the neurons never fully adapt. They keep the world from fading. It is only when we hold our gaze unusually steady and when the peripheral stimulus is faint to begin with that the adaptation can outpace these tiny movements and the image begins to disappear. The TROXLER effect is most pronounced in the periphery, where vision is already vague and low in detail. Sharp, high-contrast objects in the center of vision resist the effect because the difference between them and their surroundings is too strong to fade. but soft colors at the edges of sight are perfect candidates for vanishing. With patience and a steady gaze, you can watch your own peripheral world quietly empty itself out. What the TROXLER effect teaches is that perception is fundamentally about contrast and change rather than steady presence. We do not see the world as it simply is, holding every detail in constant view. We see differences, edges, movements, transitions. The unchanging background is something the brain actively maintains through its own small movements, and when that refreshing fails, the background dissolves. Our stable, continuous visual world is not a given, but an achievement, propped up by ceaseless micro-adjustments that we never feel. Déjà vu. There is a moment that almost everyone has experienced at least once. You walk into a room, or you hear a sentence spoken aloud, and suddenly a strange feeling washes over you. You have been here before. You have lived this exact moment before, and yet you know, rationally, that you have not. This is déjà vu, a French phrase meaning already seen, and it is one of the most common and most curious glitches in human perception. What makes déjà vu so unsettling is the certainty that accompanies it. It is not merely a vague sense of familiarity, it is a deep bodily conviction that the present moment is a perfect copy of a past one, even when you cannot place where or when that past moment occurred. For most of human history, people interpreted these moments as glimpses of past lives or prophetic dreams. The experience felt too vivid, too specific, to be a mere trick of the mind. Modern understanding offers a quieter explanation. The leading theory suggests that déjà vu is a kind of timing error in the brain. Your brain processes incoming experience through multiple pathways, and these normally arrive in close synchrony. But occasionally one pathway lags by a fraction of a second behind another. When the delayed signal finally arrives, the brain has already processed the same information through the faster route. The new information is then tagged, mistakenly, as a memory rather than a fresh perception. The present moment is filed away as the past, and so you feel that you are remembering something that is, in fact, happening right now. Another theory points to the memory systems deep in the temporal lobe that handle the sense of familiarity. This familiarity system can sometimes fire independently of the actual recollection system. The result is a feeling of recognition without any accompanying memory. You feel that you know this moment intimately, but you cannot retrieve a single detail about when you supposedly encountered it before because there is nothing to retrieve. Déjà vu tends to occur more frequently in younger people and to decrease with age. It is more common when we are tired, stressed, or slightly unwell. Conditions in which the brain's timing becomes more prone to small errors. For most people, it is entirely harmless, a brief and gentle glitch, a momentary hiccup in the vast machinery of perception. It is the mind catching itself in a small act of confusion, mistaking the present for the past, and then quietly correcting the error before moving on. Jamais vu. If déjà vu is the feeling that something unfamiliar is strangely familiar, then jamais vu is its mirror opposite. The feeling that something deeply familiar has suddenly become strange. The phrase means never seen, and it describes a glitch in which a word, a face, or a place that you know perfectly well is abruptly drained of its familiarity. You look at it and it seems alien, as though you are encountering it for the very first time, even though you have encountered it 1,000 times before. The most common way to experience jamais vu is through repetition. Take an ordinary word, a simple one like door, and say it aloud over and over. After a surprisingly short time, the word begins to lose its meaning. The letters seem to rearrange themselves into something arbitrary and foreign. You begin to wonder whether it is even a real word at all. This is jamais vu in action, and the specific version triggered by repeated words is sometimes called semantic satiation. What is happening is a kind of fatigue in the brain's recognition systems. When you process a word, a small network of neurons fires to connect the symbol with its meaning. But neurons that fire repeatedly in quick succession begin to tire. After enough repetitions, the connection between the symbol and its meaning becomes temporarily exhausted, and the word is stripped of the meaning that normally clothes it. You are left looking at the bare symbol, disconnected from everything that made it familiar. Jamais vu can occur outside of word repetition as well. People sometimes report it while looking at the face of someone they know well, when the face momentarily appears to be that of a stranger. It can happen with a route you have driven hundreds of times, which suddenly feels unfamiliar and disorienting. In each case, the feeling is the same. The familiar has become foreign. The known has become strange. These experiences are usually fleeting, lasting only a few seconds before the brain's recognition systems recover. They are most likely to occur when we are tired or when we have been focusing intently on something for a long time. Jamais vu reminds us that familiarity is not a fixed property of the things we know. It is an active process, generated continuously by the brain, and like any process, it can stutter and briefly fail. When it does, we are granted a strange glimpse of how the world might look without the constant, invisible work of recognition that normally holds it together. The Mandela Effect. Somewhere in the collective memory of millions of people lies a man named Nelson Mandela who died in prison in the 1980s. People remember the news coverage, they remember the mourning. There is only one problem with this memory. It is wrong. Mandela was released, became the president of his country, and lived until 2013. And yet, a remarkable number of people share a vivid, detailed, and entirely false memory of his much earlier death. This phenomenon, in which large groups of people remember something that never happened, has come to be known as the Mandela Effect. Once you begin to look, examples appear everywhere. Many people remember a beloved children's book series with a name spelled one way, when it was always spelled another. Many people remember a famous line from a classic film, quoted endlessly when the actual line is subtly different, and crucially, these are not isolated errors. They are shared errors, held in common by large numbers of people who have never met, each one independently certain that their version is correct. What makes the Mandela Effect so compelling is precisely this collective nature. We accept that individual memory is fallible, but when thousands of people misremember the same thing, in the same way, it feels like something more. It feels as though reality itself has shifted, which is why the phenomenon has attracted imaginative explanations involving parallel universes and alternate timelines. The more grounded explanation lies in the nature of memory itself. Memory is not a recording, it is a reconstruction, assembled fresh each time we remember, drawing on fragments, expectations, and the influence of other people. When many minds share the same cultural references and the same patterns of expectation, they tend to make the same reconstruction errors. A name that follows a common spelling pattern gets remembered according to that pattern, even when the actual spelling breaks it. The error is not random. It is shaped by the common architecture of human cognition, which is why so many people land on the same false memory. Social reinforcement deepens the effect. Once a false memory is shared and confirmed by others, it becomes stronger and more resistant to correction. We trust memories that others seem to share, taking the agreement of the crowd as evidence of truth. The Mandela Effect, in the end, is not evidence of shifting realities. It is evidence of how deeply social our memories are, how much we build them together, and how a shared mind can hold a shared mistake with all the confidence of perfect truth. Tip of the tongue. You know the word. You absolutely know it. It is right there, hovering at the very edge of your awareness, so close that you can almost feel its shape, but you cannot quite grasp it. It dances away each time you reach for it, leaving you stranded mid-sentence. This is the tip of the tongue state, one of the most familiar and most maddening glitches in the everyday operation of the mind. The tip of the tongue experience reveals something profound about how memory works. When you retrieve a word, you are not pulling a single complete file from storage. You are assembling the word from several different kinds of information stored in different places. There is the meaning of the word, there is the sound of the word, and there is the spelling. Normally, all of these are retrieved together, smoothly and instantly. But sometimes the retrieval becomes partial. You access the meaning, you know exactly what concept you are reaching for, but the connection to the sound fails to complete. You have the idea, but not the word that names it. This is why the state has such a particular texture. You are not entirely blank. You often have fragments. You may know that the word starts with a certain letter or that it has 3 syllables. You may be able to reject incorrect suggestions immediately, knowing with certainty that the offered word is not the one you want, even though you cannot produce the right one yourself. The information exists, but the bridge to it has collapsed, and you are left staring across the gap. Curiously, the harder you try to force the word, the more elusive it often becomes. Many people find that the word arrives only later, unbidden, when they have stopped searching and turned their attention to something else. You are washing dishes, and suddenly the word appears, fully formed, as if it had been waiting for you to look away. This suggests that the retrieval process continues to work in the background, beneath conscious awareness, and that the anxious searching of the conscious mind may actually interfere with it. The tip of the tongue state becomes more frequent as we age, and it is more common with words we use rarely and with proper names. It is one of the gentlest reminders that the smooth, effortless flow of language rests upon an intricate and delicate system of connections, any one of which can briefly falter. Most of the time, the system works so perfectly that we never notice it. The tip of the tongue moment is one of the rare occasions when the curtain lifts and we glimpse the hidden effort behind the simple act of finding a word. The stopped clock illusion. Glance at a clock with a ticking second hand, and you may notice something peculiar. In the instant your eyes land on it, the second hand sometimes appears to freeze, to pause for a moment longer than it should, before resuming its steady ticking. The first second after you look seems to stretch, to last just a little too long. This small glitch has a name. It is called the stopped clock illusion or chronostasis, and it offers a remarkable window into how the brain constructs our experience of time. To understand it, you have to understand something strange about how we see. Your eyes do not move smoothly across a scene. They jump in rapid flicks called saccades from one point of focus to another. During each of these jumps, your vision is effectively blurred and useless because the image is sweeping too quickly across the retina to be processed. If the brain showed you this blur, the world would smear sickeningly every time you moved your eyes. Instead, the brain simply discards the visual input during the jump. For a brief moment, you are functionally blind, and you never notice it. But here is the clever part. The brain does not want you to perceive a gap every time your eyes move. So it covers the gap by extending the image you see immediately after the jump backward in time, filling in the blank period with the new image as though you had been seeing it all along. When you look at the second hand, the brain backdates the new image to cover the blind period. The result is that the first second you perceive seems to last longer than a normal second because it has been padded with the time that was actually spent in the blur of the saccade. This means the freezing of the second hand is not an illusion about the clock at all. It is an illusion about time, generated by the brain's effort to give you a seamless experience of the world despite the constant interruptions of eye movement. The brain is, in a sense, lying to you about how much time has passed, in order to hide the fact that your vision goes dark dozens of times every minute. The stopped clock is simply the moment when this lie becomes briefly visible. What is remarkable about chronostasis is how it overturns our intuitive sense of time as a fixed external thing that flows at a constant rate. Time, as we experience it, is constructed by the brain, edited and adjusted to serve the goal of a coherent experience. The seconds we perceive are not raw measurements of the universe. They are the output of a system that is constantly making decisions about what to show us and how to paper over the gaps. The stopped clock illusion is one of the few moments when we catch this system in the act. The phantom vibration. You feel it clearly, a buzz against your leg, the unmistakable sensation of your phone vibrating in your pocket. You reach for it, expecting a message, and you find nothing. The screen is dark. There was no vibration at all, and yet you felt it, as distinctly as you have felt every real vibration before it. This is the phantom vibration, a thoroughly modern glitch that has emerged only in the age of the mobile phone, and that an overwhelming majority of phone users now report experiencing. The phantom vibration is a fascinating example of how the brain can generate a sensory experience that has no external cause. It is, in essence, a perception without a stimulus, a feeling manufactured entirely within the nervous system. Perception is not a passive reception of the world. The brain is constantly predicting, anticipating, and interpreting the flood of sensory signals it receives. When you carry a phone that frequently vibrates against your body, your brain learns to expect those vibrations and it becomes highly attuned to detecting them. The trouble is that the body is full of small, ambiguous sensations all the time. The brush of fabric, a minor muscle twitch, the shift of your clothing as you move. Most of these signals are meaningless and are filtered out below the level of awareness. But when your brain is primed to detect a phone vibration, it lowers the threshold for interpreting these ambiguous signals as vibrations. A random twitch, which would normally be ignored, gets caught by the alert detection system and misinterpreted as the buzz you have been half expecting. This is a case of the brain favoring a particular kind of error. Faced with uncertain information, the perceptual system can either miss a real vibration or falsely detect one that is not there. Given how much we have come to depend on our phones, the brain becomes biased toward false detections. It would rather alert you to a vibration that did not happen than risk letting you miss one that did. The phantom vibration is the price of this bias. The phenomenon tends to be stronger in people who are more emotionally invested in their phones, who feel anxious about missing messages. It often fades when the relationship with the phone changes, when notifications are turned off, or when the device is carried in a different way. The phantom vibration is a glitch born entirely of habit and expectation, a reminder that our brains are shaped by the environments we live in, and that a technology we have carried for only a couple of decades has already rewired our perception enough to make us feel things that are not there. It is a ghost in the nervous system, conjured by anticipation, vanishing the moment we look. The MCGURK effect. Watch a person's mouth as they speak, and your ears and eyes work together so seamlessly that you never imagine they could disagree. But they can, and when they do, the result is one of the most startling glitches in all of perception. The MCGURK effect demonstrates that what you hear is not determined by sound alone. It is shaped powerfully and unconsciously by what you see. Your eyes can override your ears, changing the very sounds you believe you are hearing. The classic demonstration works like this. A video shows a person making the mouth movements for one syllable, while the audio plays the sound of a different syllable. The actual sound entering your ears is unchanged throughout, but when you watch the mouth movements, you hear a third syllable, a blend between what your eyes see and what your ears receive. Close your eyes, and you hear the true sound clearly. Open them, and the false sound returns instantly and irresistibly. You can understand the trick completely, and still you cannot stop your eyes from changing what you hear. This reveals something fundamental about how the brain processes the world. We tend to think of our senses as separate channels, each delivering its own independent stream of information. But the brain does not keep the senses separate. It combines them, constantly and automatically. When it comes to understanding speech, the brain has learned that the movements of the mouth carry valuable information about what is being said, so it integrates the visual information from the lips with the auditory information from the ears, treating them as two reports on the same event and merging them into a single conclusion. Normally, this integration is enormously helpful. In a noisy room, watching a person's lips makes their speech far easier to understand because the visual information supplements the degraded sound. The MCGURK effect only arises when the experiment deliberately puts the two senses into conflict. Faced with this contradiction, the brain does not present you with both versions. It silently computes a single answer and hands it to you as though it were the simple truth. The unsettling lesson of the MCGURK effect is that perception is not a window onto reality, but an interpretation of it, constructed from multiple sources and presented to us already finished, with the seams hidden. What you hear is not just what reaches your ears. It is the brain's best guess, informed by everything else it knows, including what your eyes are reporting. We experience this guess as direct, immediate, undeniable sensory fact. The MCGURK effect pulls back the curtain just enough to show that even our most basic perceptions are assembled and quietly authored by a mind that we mistake for a passive observer. Change blindness. You would surely notice if something large changed right in front of your eyes. You would notice if the person you were talking to was suddenly replaced by someone else, if a prominent object in a scene vanished while you were looking at it. This conviction feels obvious, and yet it is wrong. The glitch known as change blindness reveals that we routinely fail to notice enormous changes happening directly in our field of view. The experiments that demonstrate this are simple and deeply humbling. In one version, a person is shown an image, then the image briefly flickers, then it reappears with a significant alteration. A large object has changed color, or disappeared, or moved. People stare directly at the image, searching for the change, and often take a remarkably long time to find it. In another version, conducted in the real world, an experimenter stops a stranger to ask for directions, and during a brief interruption is physically swapped for a completely different person. A startling number of people continue the conversation without noticing that the human being in front of them has been replaced. How can such dramatic changes go unseen? We feel as though we are continuously taking in a complete, detailed picture of everything in front of us. But this is not how vision works. At any given moment, we actually perceive only a small region in fine detail, the spot where our attention is directed. The rest of the visual field is far vaguer than we believe, filled in by assumption rather than by genuine detailed perception. We do not store a complete image of the scene. We sample it, attending to one thing at a time, and we rely on the world itself to remain stable so that we can look back whenever we need more information. Change blindness occurs because we only detect changes in the specific things we happen to be attending to. If a change takes place outside the narrow spotlight of attention, especially during a moment of interruption that masks the motion of the change, we have nothing to compare it against. The brain, assuming the world is stable, simply accepts the new version and carries on. Our vivid impression of a fully detailed visual world is a kind of confident fiction, sustained by the fact that the world usually does stay put. The implications reach far beyond the laboratory. Change blindness explains why eyewitnesses can miss crucial details, why we overlook things we are looking straight at, why magicians can alter their props under our very gaze. In truth, we see far less than we think, and we construct the rest, trusting the stability of the world to cover for the limits of our attention. Change blindness is the glitch that exposes the vast gap between how much we believe we perceive and how little we actually take in. Inattentional blindness. Closely related to change blindness is the glitch of inattentional blindness. Here, the failure is not about missing a change, but about missing something fully present, plainly visible, and often quite remarkable, simply because our attention is occupied elsewhere. When we focus intently on one thing, we can become completely blind to other things directly in front of us. Attention, it turns out, is not just a spotlight that brightens what it lands on. It is also a kind of blindfold for everything it does not. The most celebrated demonstration involves a video of people passing basketballs. Viewers are asked to count how many times the players wearing a particular color pass the ball. They watch with great concentration, absorbed in the task. Midway through, something extraordinary happens. A person in an unmistakable costume walks slowly through the middle of the scene, pauses, gestures, and exits. The figure is in plain view for several seconds, impossible to miss, and yet roughly half of all viewers focused on counting passes do not see it at all. When the video is played again and the figure is pointed out, they are astonished, often insisting that it could not have been there the first time. This glitch reveals the profound limits of conscious perception. We have a strong intuition that anything significant in our visual field will automatically capture our notice. But this is not the case. Perception requires attention. Without attention directed towards something, it can fail to enter awareness entirely, no matter how visible it is. The eyes register the light. The image lands on the retina. The signals travel to the brain, and still the object never reaches conscious experience because the attentional resources needed to bring it forward were committed to another task. Inattentional blindness shows that we do not have unlimited capacity to process the world. Attention is a scarce resource, and we can only consciously perceive a fraction of what is available to us at any moment. This is why we can drive a familiar route while lost in thought and arrive with no memory of the journey. Why we can fail to see a friend waving at us when we are searching for something else. The practical consequences are significant and sometimes serious. Inattentional blindness explains many accidents, in which a person looks directly toward a hazard, but absorbed in another task, fails to perceive it. It cautions us against overconfidence in our own awareness. The truth is that we move through the world perceiving only what we attend to, and a great deal passes us by unseen, present to our eyes but absent from our minds. Inattentional blindness is the glitch that reveals how much of the visible world we are, at any given moment, simply not seeing. The cocktail party effect. Imagine a crowded room filled with the overlapping noise of dozens of conversations. It should be an indecipherable wall of sound. And yet, somehow, you are able to focus on the single conversation in front of you, following it clearly while the surrounding noise fades into a manageable background. This remarkable feat of auditory attention is called the cocktail party effect. And while it is mostly a triumph of the brain, it conceals a fascinating glitch. The first half of the phenomenon is impressive enough. Your brain takes the chaotic mixture of sounds and somehow separates it into distinct streams, allowing you to attend to one voice while suppressing the others. It uses many cues to do this, including the direction the sound comes from, the pitch of the speaker's voice, and the meaning of their words. The voices you are not listening to do not disappear, but they are turned down, pushed into the background, where they form an unobtrusive murmur. This selective filtering is so automatic that you rarely appreciate how difficult a problem your brain is solving. But here is where the glitch reveals itself. The voices you are ignoring are not truly tuned out. Your brain continues to monitor them, quietly, beneath your awareness, scanning their content for anything important. The proof is striking and familiar. If someone across the room says your name, you will very often hear it, your attention snapping instantly toward the source, even though you were not consciously listening to that conversation at all. This means your brain was processing the supposedly ignored conversation deeply enough to recognize your name within it, all without bringing that conversation into your conscious experience. This reveals that the filtering of attention is not a simple gate that blocks unwanted sound at the door. It is a sophisticated system that processes far more than it lets through to awareness, evaluating the unattended streams for relevance and allowing significant items to break through when they matter. You are, in effect, listening to everything all the time while consciously experiencing only the small portion you have selected. The rest is handled in the background, analyzed and mostly discarded, except when something important, like your own name, triggers an alarm that redirects your attention. The cocktail party effect shows us that the boundary between what we perceive and what we ignore is far more porous than it feels. We imagine that we attend to one thing and shut out the rest entirely, but in reality, the rest is still being processed, still capable of seizing our attention at any moment. The glitch in which your name suddenly leaps out of an unattended conversation is a small reminder that the unconscious mind is always listening, always working, sorting through the flood of information that the conscious mind has chosen to set aside. We hear far more than we know. Pareidolia. Look up at the clouds and you may see a face, a dragon, a galloping horse. Glance at the front of a car and the headlights and grille seem to form a pair of eyes and a mouth. Stare at the random texture of a wall and figures begin to emerge from the chaos. This tendency to perceive meaningful images, especially faces, in random or ambiguous visual information is called pareidolia, and it is one of the most pervasive and revealing glitches in human perception. Pareidolia arises from the extraordinary priority the human brain gives to detecting faces. We are intensely social creatures, and for our ancestors, the ability to quickly recognize a face, to read its expression, to determine whether it was friend or foe, was a matter of survival. Over countless generations, the brain developed specialized machinery devoted to face detection, a system so finely tuned and so eager that it fires at the slightest provocation. It does not wait for a clear and certain face before responding. It leaps at any arrangement that even loosely resembles two eyes and a mouth. This eagerness reflects a deep bias in how the brain handles uncertainty. When it comes to faces, the cost of missing a real one was historically far greater than the cost of falsely perceiving one that was not there. A face overlooked might be a predator unnoticed, a potentially fatal error. A face falsely perceived in a pattern of leaves costs nothing but a momentary mistake, quickly corrected. So the brain evolved to err heavily on the side of detection, to see faces everywhere. Pareidolia is the natural consequence of this lopsided arrangement. The phenomenon extends beyond faces to other meaningful patterns. We hear words and melodies in random noise. We perceive shapes and figures in clouds and stains. We find significance in coincidences. This pattern-seeking tendency is woven deeply into the mind, and it serves us well far more often than it misleads us, allowing us to extract genuine signals from noisy environments. But it also means that we are prone to seeing structure where there is only chance, to imposing order and intention on what is in fact random. Pareidolia has shaped human culture profoundly. It lies behind countless reports of figures appearing in unexpected places, behind the human impulse to populate the natural world with hidden presences. It reminds us that perception is not a neutral recording of what is there, but an active process of interpretation, shaped by what the brain is looking for and primed to find. We do not simply see the world, we project onto it, completing its ambiguities according to our deepest expectations. And chief among those expectations is the presence of other minds, other faces, looking back at us from the shapes of a world that is, in truth, indifferent and blank. The STROOP effect. Here is a simple task that turns out to be surprisingly difficult. Imagine a list of color words printed in colored ink. Your job is not to read the words, but to name the color of the ink each word is printed in. When the word and the ink match, the task is effortless. But when they conflict, when the word red is printed in blue ink, something jams in your mind. You stumble, you slow down, you feel a small internal struggle. This interference is the STROOP effect, and it exposes a deep truth about the automatic nature of certain mental processes. The reason for the difficulty is that reading, for a literate adult, has become almost completely automatic. You cannot choose not to read a word placed in front of you. The moment your eyes land on it, its meaning is extracted instantly and involuntarily. Naming the color of ink, by contrast, is a more deliberate and effortful process. So when the word and the ink color disagree, two processes are triggered at once. The automatic reading process delivers one answer, and the deliberate color naming process must deliver a different one, and the two collide. Your conscious goal is to name the ink color, but the automatic reading process keeps shoving the written word into your awareness, demanding to be spoken. To succeed, you must actively suppress the powerful, automatic urge to read the word, and this suppression takes time and mental effort. The slowing and stumbling you experience is the cost of overriding an automatic process with a deliberate one. The word's meaning arrives first, uninvited, and you must hold it back while you produce the answer your conscious mind actually wants. The STROOP effect is one of the most reliable phenomena in all of psychology, precisely because it so cleanly demonstrates the conflict between automatic and controlled mental processes. It reveals that much of what happens in the mind is not under our voluntary control, that skilled and practiced processes run themselves whether we will them to or not. The fluency that makes reading so easy in normal life becomes an obstacle the moment we need to ignore the words and attend to something else. Its deeper value is what it reveals about the structure of the mind. We are not unified, single-minded agents executing our intentions cleanly. We are bundles of processes, some automatic and some deliberate, that can pull in different directions at the same time. The STROOP effect catches this internal conflict in a single, simple, frustrating moment when the part of you that reads and the part of you that wants to name a color briefly fight for control of your tongue. Saccadic masking. Stand in front of a mirror and look at your own left eye, then quickly shift your gaze to your right eye. Try as you might, you will never see your own eyes move. The motion is invisible to you. Ask a friend to do the same, and you will plainly see their eyes dart from one position to another. But your own eye movements in the mirror simply do not appear. This is not a trick of the glass. It is a glitch called saccadic masking, and it reveals that we are functionally blind for a significant portion of every waking moment. The eyes do not glide smoothly across a scene. They move in rapid jumps called saccades, flicking from one point of focus to another several times each second. During each of these jumps, the image of the world sweeps across the retina far too fast to be processed clearly. If the brain allowed you to see this sweeping blur, the world would smear nauseatingly every time your eyes moved. To prevent this, the brain switches off visual processing during the saccade, suppressing the blurred input so that you never see it at all. For the brief duration of each jump, you are effectively blind. Add up all these moments of suppression across a day, and they amount to a startling total. We spend a considerable fraction of our waking visual life in these tiny pockets of blindness, and yet we experience vision as perfectly continuous. The reason we never notice the gaps is that the brain seamlessly stitches together the clear images from before and after each saccade, papering over the blind intervals so smoothly that no seam is visible. The blackouts are edited out of our experience before they ever reach awareness. When you look at your own eyes in the mirror, the timing works out so that your eyes are moving precisely during the moments when your vision is suppressed. By the time vision resumes, your eyes have already arrived at their new position, and so you only ever see them stationary. When you watch someone else's eyes, there is no such suppression, because your own eyes are still, and so their movement is plainly visible. The glitch is entirely about your own blindness during your own eye movements. Saccadic masking is one of the most profound demonstrations that our seamless experience of vision is an elaborate construction rather than a faithful recording. The raw input to the eyes is constantly interrupted, blurred, and switched off, and the brain works tirelessly behind the scenes to hide all of this, presenting us with a smooth and stable world. We believe we are watching reality unfold continuously, but in truth, we are watching a carefully edited highlight reel with the gaps and blurs cut out and the remaining pieces blended into the illusion of an unbroken whole. The rubber hand illusion. Place your hand on a table, hidden from your own view behind a screen, and in its place, in plain sight, position a realistic rubber hand. Now have someone stroke both your hidden real hand and the visible rubber hand at exactly the same time, with the same gentle motion. After a minute or two, something deeply strange happens. You begin to feel that the rubber hand is your own. The touch you see being applied to the fake hand seems to be the touch you feel. The boundary of your own body has shifted to include a piece of rubber. This is the rubber hand illusion, and it reveals how fragile and constructed our sense of owning our own bodies truly is. The illusion works by exploiting the way the brain combines different senses to determine what belongs to the body. Your sense of where your hand is and whether it is yours depends on the integration of several streams of information. There is vision, what you see, there is touch, what you feel, and there is the internal sense of your body's position. Normally, these streams agree, all pointing to the same location. But in the rubber hand illusion, vision and touch are deliberately manipulated to tell a coordinated story that overrides the truth. When you watch the rubber hand being stroked at the same instant that you feel your hidden hand being stroked, the synchrony is overwhelmingly persuasive. The brain reasons that the seen touch and the felt touch are happening together, and the simplest explanation is that the hand you are watching must be the hand you are feeling. So the brain accepts the rubber hand as part of your body, recalibrating your sense of self to incorporate it. You have, in a small way, been convinced that a foreign object is a part of you. The power of the illusion becomes vivid when the rubber hand is suddenly threatened. If someone moves to strike the rubber hand, people flinch, gasp, and show genuine alarm as though their own flesh were in danger. The body's protective responses fire in defense of a piece of rubber because the brain has, for the moment, claimed it as its own. This reaction proves that the sense of ownership is not merely an intellectual judgment, but a deep, felt conviction. The rubber hand illusion overturns the assumption that our sense of owning our body is fixed and beyond question. It shows that this sense is continuously constructed by the brain from the agreement of the senses, and that it can be reshaped and fooled when the senses are made to tell a false but consistent story. The feeling that this body is mine, which seems like the most secure fact of our existence, turns out to be a perception like any other, assembled from evidence and open to manipulation. We do not simply have bodies. We continuously construct the experience of having them, and that construction can be quietly rewritten. Hypnagogic jerks. You are drifting off to sleep, sinking pleasantly into the soft border between waking and dreaming, when suddenly your whole body convulses with a violent jerk. Your limbs twitch, your heart leaps, and you are yanked back into full wakefulness, often accompanied by a vivid sensation of falling. For a moment, you are disoriented and startled, before you realize that nothing is wrong and settle back down. This sudden muscular spasm at the edge of sleep is called a hypnagogic jerk, and almost everyone has experienced it at some point. These jerks occur during the delicate transition from wakefulness into sleep, a period when the body and brain are handing off control between two very different states. As you fall asleep, your muscles relax and your body begins to power down its motor systems. But this transition is not always perfectly smooth. Sometimes, as the systems that maintain wakefulness fade and the systems that govern sleep take over, there is a brief miscommunication, a momentary glitch in the handoff, and the brain sends out a sudden burst of activity that triggers the muscles to contract sharply. The result is the characteristic jolt. One intriguing aspect is the dream imagery that often accompanies these jerks, particularly the sensation of falling. As the body relaxes and begins to descend into sleep, the rapidly shifting brain state can generate fragmentary dream images, and the muscle relaxation and loss of bodily awareness may be interpreted by the half-asleep mind as falling. The jerk and the falling sensation become entangled, producing the familiar experience of dreaming that you have stepped off a ledge and snapping awake as your body lurches in response. The mind, caught between states, weaves a tiny story to make sense of the strange signals it is receiving. Hypnagogic jerks are entirely normal and almost always harmless, a benign side effect of the imperfect machinery of falling asleep. They tend to become more frequent and more intense when we are overtired, stressed, sleep-deprived, or have consumed stimulants. When the body is exhausted and the brain is racing, the transition into sleep becomes more turbulent. Paradoxically, the more desperate we are for sleep, the more our entry into it can be disrupted by these sudden interruptions. What makes the hypnagogic jerk so interesting is that it occurs at one of the most mysterious boundaries of human experience, the threshold between consciousness and unconsciousness. Falling asleep feels like a simple, gentle fading, but it is in fact a complex neurological process, a careful sequence of systems shutting down and others starting up. The hypnagogic jerk is a moment when this sequence stumbles, when the smooth descent into sleep hits a small bump and the body briefly rebels against the dissolution of waking awareness. It is a glitch at the very edge of consciousness, a reminder of how strange and delicate the simple act of falling asleep truly is. Earworms. A fragment of a song lodges itself in your mind and will not leave. It plays over and over, the same few bars repeating endlessly, following you through your day no matter how much you wish it would stop. You did not choose to summon it, and you cannot easily banish it. This phenomenon, the involuntary and repetitive replaying of a piece of music in the mind, is commonly called an earworm, and it is one of the most universal and oddly intrusive glitches of the human mind. Earworms typically consist of a short segment of a song, usually the catchiest part, repeated in a loop rather than played all the way through. They tend to feature songs that are simple, repetitive, and rhythmically catchy, the very qualities that make music easy to remember. Often, an earworm is triggered by hearing the song recently, but it can also be sparked by a word, an image, or an association that connects to the song. The mind seizes on the fragment and sets it spinning, and the loop can persist for hours or even days. The looping nature points to something about how memory and repetition interact. When a song is left incomplete in the mind, the brain seems compelled to keep returning to it, to keep trying to finish it. And this drive to complete an unfinished pattern may be part of what keeps the loop alive. The fragment that plays is often the part just before a satisfying resolution, and the mind, denied that resolution, replays the approach to it over and over without ever arriving. The very incompleteness of the fragment fuels its persistence. Earworms tend to strike most readily when the mind is idle, unoccupied, or wandering, when there is mental space for the song to fill. They are more common during repetitive, low-attention activities and less common when we are deeply absorbed in something demanding. People who care a great deal about music tend to experience them more frequently, and while they are usually merely annoying, they can occasionally become distressing when they refuse to fade. Various strategies seem to help dislodge an earworm, though none works reliably for everyone. Listening to the full song, all the way through to its resolution, sometimes releases the loop by giving the brain the completion it was seeking. Engaging in an absorbing task can crowd the song out by occupying the mental space it was filling. The earworm, in the end, is a small glitch of memory and attention, a fragment of music caught in a loop within the machinery of the mind, demonstrating how a catchy melody can hijack our inner experience and replay itself against our will. Time dilation in danger. In the instant before a car crash, in the moment of a sudden fall, many people report a strange and vivid experience. Time seems to slow down. The world shifts into a kind of slow motion, events unfolding with unnatural deliberation, every detail rendered with crystalline clarity. People describe seeing the accident develop frame by frame, experiencing a few seconds as though they stretched into a much longer duration. This dramatic distortion of time during moments of danger is one of the most striking glitches in our perception of the passage of time. The experience feels so real that it is tempting to conclude that the brain truly speeds up during emergencies, but careful investigation suggests something more subtle. When researchers have tested whether people can actually perceive fast events better during frightening situations, the answer appears to be no. The brain does not literally accelerate its processing. Instead, the slowing of time seems to be largely a trick of memory, a distortion in how the experience is recorded and later recalled, rather than a real change in how it is perceived as it happens. The key lies in the relationship between memory and our sense of duration. During a moment of intense fear, the brain shifts into a heightened state and lays down memories with extraordinary density and detail. Ordinarily, our experience is recorded sparingly, but in an emergency, the brain captures far more, encoding the moment with unusual richness. When we later look back, our sense of how long it lasted is partly based on how much we remember of it. Because the dangerous moment is packed with so much vivid detail, far more than a normal moment of equal length, it seems in retrospect to have lasted much longer. The density of memory is mistaken for an extension of time. This reframes the slow-motion experience not as a real-time superpower, but as a consequence of the brain's emergency recording mode. In the moment, time may not actually have slowed at all, but the flood of richly encoded detail creates the powerful impression, upon reflection, that the seconds stretched. The slowing is real as an experience, but it lives in memory rather than in the moment. Time dilation in DEJA reveals how thoroughly our sense of time depends on memory and attention rather than on any internal clock ticking at a steady rate. The passage of time, as we experience it, is not a fixed measurement, but a flexible construction shaped by how much we notice, how much we remember, and how emotionally charged our experiences are. Moments of boredom crawl, moments of joy fly, and moments of terror stretch into vivid slow motion, all because our perception of duration is woven from the texture of experience rather than measured by any reliable instrument. The GANZFELD effect. Imagine flooding your senses with perfect, featureless uniformity. Your entire visual field filled with an even, unbroken expanse of soft light, with no shapes, no edges, no variation of any kind. Your ears filled with a steady, uniform hiss of unchanging sound. After a few minutes immersed in this featureless field, your mind begins to do something remarkable. It starts to generate experiences that are not there. You may begin to see shapes, colors, and images, to hear sounds and voices, to enter a strange, dreamlike state of vivid hallucination. This is the GANZFELD effect, and it reveals what the mind does when it is starved of the changing input it craves. The word GANZFELD means whole field, referring to the uniform, structureless sensory environment that produces the effect. The technique involves removing all meaningful variation from perception. With no edges to detect, no changes to track, the perceptual system is left with nothing to do, and it is precisely this absence of input that triggers the strange results. The brain, deprived of the steady stream of signal it normally feeds upon, does not simply go quiet. Instead, it begins to manufacture its own. This connects to a deep principle about how perception operates. The brain is not a passive receiver, waiting for the world to imprint itself upon a blank surface. It is an active interpreter, constantly generating predictions and hypotheses about what is out there, and then checking those hypotheses against the incoming sensory evidence. Normally, the flood of real input keeps these internal predictions anchored to reality. But when the input becomes perfectly uniform, there is nothing to check the predictions against. The internal hypotheses run free, unconstrained by reality, and they surface into awareness as hallucinations. In essence, the GANZFELD effect exposes the brain's constant, hidden activity of constructing experience. The shapes and sounds that emerge from the featureless field are the raw material of perception itself, normally invisible because it is anchored to real sensory input. Strip away the input, and the construction machinery keeps running, now producing experiences from its own internal noise. We are shown that perception is always partly an invention, and that the world we see is always partly a projection from within, usually disciplined by reality, but capable in its absence of running wild. The GANZFELD effect has long fascinated those who study consciousness and perception. It demonstrates that the mind abhors a sensory vacuum, that it cannot tolerate the absence of pattern, and that it will fill any such void with productions of its own making. It reveals that the boundary between perceiving and imagining is thinner than we assume. When we deprive the brain of the changing world it depends upon, it does not rest. It dreams while we are awake, conjuring a private reality out of nothing, showing us that perception has never been a simple matter of seeing what is there, but always an active, generative act that the world normally keeps tethered to the truth. Motion-induced blindness. Stare at a small stationary dot while a pattern of other moving dots swirls around it, and after a few seconds, something disturbing occurs. The stationary dot, which is clearly present and which you are looking at directly, simply vanishes from your awareness. It blinks out of existence, swallowed by the moving field, even though it never actually went anywhere. Shift your attention or move your eyes, and it reappears. This unsettling disappearance of a clearly visible object is called motion-induced blindness, and it shows how readily the brain can erase things from our conscious experience. The phenomenon is striking because the vanishing object is in no way hidden, dim, or hard to see. It is a clear, distinct dot, fully visible, that the brain nonetheless chooses to suppress from awareness in the presence of surrounding motion. Something about the combination of a steady stationary target and a busy moving background causes the brain to drop the stationary item from the picture. The object continues to register on the retina the entire time, but it fails to reach conscious perception, edited out by some process operating beneath awareness. The leading explanations suggest that this is the result of how the brain manages competing visual information and decides what deserves to be consciously perceived. The moving background is dynamic and attention-grabbing, and it may dominate the visual processing in a way that causes the steady, unchanging target to be deprioritized and suppressed. The brain, faced with a strong moving signal and a static one, may conclude that the static item is part of an unchanging background and filter it out in favor of the more salient motion. Whatever the precise mechanism, the result is that a perfectly visible object is removed from experience by the brain's own decision about what is worth seeing. Motion-induced blindness joins a family of phenomena that demonstrate the gap between what lands on our eyes and what we consciously perceive. The image of the dot is present on the retina throughout, but presence on the retina is not the same as presence in awareness. Between the eye and the conscious mind lies an immense amount of processing, filtering, and editing, and at any of these stages, information can be discarded before it ever reaches the level of experience. What makes this glitch particularly thought-provoking is that it shows the brain actively suppressing accurate information, deleting something that is genuinely there. We tend to assume that errors of perception involve seeing things that are not present or missing things that are faint. But motion-induced blindness involves the brain confidently erasing a clear, present object. It is a reminder that our conscious visual experience is not a transparent window, but a constructed and edited product, and that the brain reserves the power to make things disappear from our awareness, even when they are right in front of us, plainly visible to the eye but invisible to the mind. The hollow mask illusion. Look at the inside of a mask, the concave, hollowed-out back of a face, and your brain refuses to see it correctly. Instead of perceiving the hollow surface curving away from you, you see a normal face with the nose projecting outward toward you, even though it is in fact pointing away. The hollow mask appears convex, a solid face popping forward, when it is really a hollow shell receding backward. This stubborn misperception is the hollow mask illusion, and it reveals how powerfully our expectations shape what we see, overriding even the clear evidence of depth before our eyes. The illusion arises from the collision between the raw visual information arriving at the eyes and the deeply ingrained expectations the brain holds about faces. Your eyes provide genuine information about depth, signaling that the mask is hollow, curving away from you. But the brain holds an overwhelmingly strong expectation that faces are convex, that they project outward, because in a lifetime of experience, every real face has done exactly that. Faced with the conflict between the depth information saying hollow and the expectation insisting convex, the brain sides with the expectation. It overrules the evidence of depth and presents you with a normal, outward-facing face. This demonstrates a fundamental principle of perception, that what we see is not determined by sensory input alone, but by the combination of that input with the brain's prior knowledge and expectations. The brain is constantly making its best guess about what is out there, weighing the incoming evidence against everything it has learned about how the world tends to be. When the evidence is ambiguous, or when a particular expectation is especially strong, the prior knowledge can dominate. Faces being so important and so consistently convex throughout our experience carry an especially powerful expectation, strong enough to invert the very depth of the surface we are looking at. The hollow mask illusion is so robust that it persists even when you know exactly what you are looking at, even when you have watched the mask rotate and seen its hollow side come into view. The moment the hollow face is oriented towards you, it flips into a convex face once more, regardless of your knowledge. This resistance to correction shows that the expectation operates at a deep, automatic level of perception beyond the reach of conscious understanding. Knowing the truth does not free you from the illusion. This glitch carries broader significance for understanding how the mind builds reality. It shows that perception is a negotiation between the world and the brain's model of the world, and that when the two disagree, the model can win. We do not see things purely as they are. We see them as our brains expect them to be, with sensory evidence serving as one input among others, and sometimes not the deciding one. The hollow mask, refusing to appear hollow no matter how clearly the depth is signaled, stands as a vivid reminder that our experience of the world is shaped from within as much as from without. After Effects and the waterfall illusion. Stare at a waterfall for a minute, watching the water pour endlessly downward, and then shift your gaze to the still rocks beside it. The stationary rocks will appear to drift upward, slowly flowing in the opposite direction to the water you were just watching, even though they are perfectly still. This curious upward creeping of a motionless object is called the motion after effect, or the waterfall illusion, and it reveals how the brain adapts to what it has recently seen, and how that adaptation lingers to distort what comes next. The waterfall illusion arises from the way the brain detects motion. There are specialized systems in the visual brain dedicated to detecting movement in particular directions, with some neurons responding to downward motion, others to upward. When you stare at the downward rushing water for a sustained period, the neurons that detect downward motion fire continuously, and after a while they begin to fatigue and adapt, reducing their response. Meanwhile, the neurons that detect upward motion remain fresh. The brain judges motion by comparing the activity of these opposing systems. When you then look at the stationary rocks, both the downward and upward motion detectors should be roughly silent, and you should perceive stillness. But because the downward detectors have been fatigued, they now fire less than the upward detectors, even in response to a still scene. This imbalance fools the brain. The relatively greater activity of the upward detectors is interpreted as genuine upward motion, and so the still rocks appear to drift upward. The after effect is a direct consequence of having adapted to the prolonged downward motion. Motion is only one of many dimensions in which such after effects occur. Stare at a color for long enough, then look at a blank surface, and you will see an after image in the opposite color. Adapt to a particular shape, a tilt, or even a face with certain features, and your perception of subsequent stimuli will be shifted away from what you adapted to. These after effects all share the same underlying logic. The brain continuously recalibrates itself based on recent input, and this recalibration biases the perception of whatever follows, distorting it in a direction opposite to the thing you adapted to. After Effects reveal that perception is not a fixed and absolute measurement of the world, but a relative and constantly adjusting process. The brain is always adapting to its recent environment, resetting its baselines, tuning its responses to the prevailing conditions. This adaptation is usually invaluable, allowing us to remain sensitive to changes across an enormous range of conditions, from bright daylight to dim dusk. But it also means that what we have just seen colors what we see next, that our perceptions carry the residue of their immediate history. The waterfall illusion, with its gently rising rocks, is a beautiful demonstration that we never see the world fresh and neutral, but always through the lingering influence of what came just before. The bystander effect. Imagine an emergency unfolding in a crowded place. A person collapses, surrounded by dozens of onlookers. You might assume that the more people present, the more likely it is that someone will help, but the opposite is often true. The presence of many witnesses can make each individual less likely to act, not more. This counterintuitive glitch in social behavior is called the bystander effect, and it reveals how profoundly our actions are shaped by those around us. The bystander effect arises from several interacting forces. The first is the diffusion of responsibility. When you are the only person present at an emergency, the responsibility to act rests entirely on you, and you feel it keenly. But when many others are present, that responsibility is divided among everyone, and each person feels only a fraction of it. Surely someone else will help, you think, and so does everyone else, and the collective result is that no one helps at all. The second force is the human tendency to look to others for cues about how to behave, especially in ambiguous situations. When something happens that we are not sure how to interpret, we glance at the people around us. If everyone else appears calm, we conclude that the situation must not be a real emergency. But everyone else is doing the same thing, seeing calm faces and concluding there is no crisis. Each person's inaction reassures the others that inaction is appropriate, and the group collectively talks itself out of responding. A third force is the fear of social embarrassment. To step forward is to risk being wrong, to risk overreacting in front of a crowd. If the situation turns out not to be an emergency, the person who acted will feel exposed and foolish. This fear holds people back, particularly when surrounded by strangers. The larger the audience, the greater the potential embarrassment, and the more powerful the inhibition against acting. The bystander effect is a sobering reminder that our moral behavior is not determined solely by our character, but is powerfully shaped by the social situation. Good, caring people can fail to help, not because they are callous, but because the dynamics of the crowd suppress their natural impulse to assist. Understanding this glitch is valuable precisely because awareness of it can counteract it. The simple knowledge that everyone may be waiting for someone else can be enough to make you the one who steps forward. The spotlight effect. You walk into a room with a stain on your shirt or a small embarrassing mistake fresh in your memory, and you feel certain that everyone notices, that all eyes are upon you. You feel exposed, scrutinized, judged, but the truth is that almost no one has noticed, and those who have will forget within moments. This tendency to overestimate how much others notice and attend to us is called the spotlight effect, and it is one of the most common and quietly tormenting glitches in social perception. The spotlight effect stems from the inescapable fact that we are the constant center of our own experience. We see the world entirely from our own perspective, with ourselves always at the focus. Our own thoughts, feelings, and appearance occupy our attention completely because we cannot escape them. This relentless self-focus leads us to dramatically overestimate how much others are attending to us as well. Because we are so vividly aware of ourselves, we assume that others must be too, projecting our own intense self-attention onto people who are in fact absorbed in their own concerns. The reality is that everyone else is just as wrapped up in their own perspective as you are in yours. The person you fear is scrutinizing your appearance is actually preoccupied with how they themselves appear. Everyone is the star of their own show, and consequently, a mere extra in everyone else's. The attention you imagine is directed at you is mostly an illusion, a projection of your own self-consciousness onto an audience that is far less interested than you believe. Studies of the spotlight effect have shown just how large the gap is between how much we think we are noticed and how much we actually are. People consistently and substantially overestimate the degree to which their appearance, their mistakes, and their behavior register with others. The embarrassing moment that feels seared into the awareness of everyone present is, in fact, barely noticed and quickly forgotten by all but ourselves. Understanding the spotlight effect offers a genuine kind of liberation. So much social anxiety springs from the false belief that we are being closely watched and judged. Recognizing that this belief is a glitch, a systematic overestimation produced by our own inescapable self-focus, can release a great deal of needless suffering. The audience we fear is barely paying attention. The spotlight we feel is one we are shining on ourselves. When we grasp this, the room becomes a far less threatening place. Confabulation. The human mind has a deep and powerful need to explain itself, to provide reasons for what it does and feels and chooses. So strong is this need that when the true reasons are unavailable, the mind does not simply admit ignorance. Instead, it invents an explanation, confidently and sincerely, and presents this invention as the genuine truth with no awareness that it has fabricated anything at all. This automatic manufacturing of false explanations is called confabulation. Confabulation is most dramatically revealed in certain unusual conditions, but its roots run through all of ordinary mental life. In studies where people are subtly influenced to make a choice without realizing the true cause, and are then asked why they did it, they readily supply a reason. The reason is invariably plausible and delivered with full confidence, but it is false because the actual cause was the hidden manipulation which the person never perceived. The mind simply generates a reasonable sounding account and believes it completely. There is no sense of making something up. The fabrication feels exactly like genuine introspection. This points to a startling conclusion about self-knowledge. We assume that we have direct access to the reasons for our own behavior, that we know why we do what we do. But much of the real machinery of decision operates beneath conscious awareness, hidden from introspection. When we report our reasons, we are often not reading off the true causes at all. We are constructing a plausible story after the fact and mistaking that story for direct knowledge. The mind is, in large part, its own narrator, inventing explanations for behavior it does not actually understand. Confabulation serves an important function, even though it produces falsehoods. It maintains our sense of being coherent, rational agents whose actions make sense. A mind that could not explain itself would be deeply unsettled. Confabulation papers over the gaps, providing a smooth and sensible narrative that preserves our sense of understanding ourselves. The story may be false, but it keeps us feeling whole and in control. The unsettling implication is that we may understand ourselves far less than we believe. The reasons we give for our preferences, our decisions, and our beliefs may often be confabulations, plausible inventions, rather than accurate reports. The confident certainty with which we explain ourselves is no guarantee of truth, because confabulation comes with exactly that certainty. This glitch invites a certain humility about self-knowledge, a recognition that the mind is partly opaque to itself, and that the stories we tell about why we are the way we are may be just that. Stories woven by a narrator who does not have access to the full truth. Choice blindness. You make a choice between two options, stating your preference clearly. A moment later, you are handed what you believe is your chosen option and asked to explain why you picked it. But unknown to you, the options have been secretly switched, and you are now holding the very thing you rejected. Remarkably, most people do not notice the swap. They take the wrong option as their own choice and proceed to explain in detail why they preferred it. This astonishing failure to detect a mismatch between what we chose and what we receive is called choice blindness. Choice blindness has been demonstrated across many kinds of decisions. People choose between faces, between flavors, between consumer products, and when handed the rejected alternative and asked to justify their choice, a surprising number fail to notice the substitution and confidently defend a preference they never held. Even more striking, they often produce elaborate reasons for the choice they did not make, describing exactly what they liked about it. The reasons flow as easily for the rejected option as they would have for the chosen one. This reveals that our sense of having clear, stable preferences may be far more fragile than we assume. We tend to believe that our choices flow from firm inner convictions, but choice blindness suggests that in many cases the conviction comes after the choice, not before it, and that we are quite capable of generating a sense of preference for whatever we happen to be holding. The reasons we give are not reports of a pre-existing preference, but constructions assembled on the spot. choice blindness connects closely to confabulation, sharing the same underlying revelation. In both cases, we discover that the explanations we give for our own mental states are often manufactured after the fact rather than read off from genuine internal knowledge. When the situation is manipulated so that our explanation must account for something we did not actually choose, the manufacturing process is exposed because we smoothly explain the wrong thing without noticing the contradiction. The deeper lesson is that the boundary between our real preferences and our constructed ones is blurry and permeable. We are not the reliable witnesses of our own choices that we imagine ourselves to be. We can be led to defend positions we did not take, to explain decisions we did not make. This glitch raises profound questions about the nature of choice and self-knowledge, suggesting that the confident inner voice declaring what we want and why may be less a faithful reporter than a creative storyteller, ready to justify whatever it finds in our hands. Blindsight. In certain rare cases of brain injury, a person loses the conscious experience of sight in part of their visual field. They report seeing nothing in that region, a blank, a void, and by their own account, they are blind there. Yet when asked to guess about things presented in their blind region, to point toward a light they claim not to see, they perform far better than chance. They respond accurately to visual information they have no conscious awareness of perceiving. This strange dissociation between seeing and knowing is called blindsight, and it reveals that consciousness and perception are not the same thing. Blindsight arises because vision is not a single unified process, but is handled by multiple pathways in the brain, only some of which give rise to conscious experience. The main pathway, which produces our normal conscious sight, can be damaged, while other, more ancient visual pathways remain intact. These surviving pathways continue to process visual information and can guide behavior, but they do not produce conscious awareness. The information gets in, gets processed, and influences action, all without ever reaching the level of conscious experience. The person genuinely does not see, yet genuinely responds to what is there. The implications are profound. Blindsight demonstrates that a great deal of visual processing can occur entirely outside of consciousness, that the brain can perceive and act upon information without the person ever knowing it. We tend to assume that to perceive something is to be aware of it. Blindsight breaks this assumption apart, showing that they can be separated, that the brain can register and use what the conscious mind never sees. It reveals consciousness as just one part of a much larger system, a part that can be bypassed while perception and behavior continue without it. Blindsight also illuminates the puzzle of what consciousness is actually for. If the brain can process visual information and guide behavior without consciousness, what does conscious experience add? These questions sit at the heart of one of the deepest mysteries in all of science. Blindsight does not answer it, but it sharpens it, showing in concrete terms that perception without awareness is possible. For the person with blindsight, the experience is deeply strange. They are asked to guess about things they cannot see, and they protest that they have no idea, and yet their guesses are correct again and again. They are accessing knowledge they do not know they possess. Blindsight stands as one of the most remarkable glitches in the relationship between the brain and the mind, a vivid demonstration that the conscious experiencing self is not the whole of what we are, and that much goes on within us that we never see, even as it shapes what we do. The Phi phenomenon. A row of lights flashes in sequence, one after another in rapid succession, and instead of seeing a series of separate flashes, you see a single light moving smoothly from one position to the next. There is no moving light. There are only stationary lights blinking on and off in order, but your brain stitches these discrete flashes into the seamless perception of continuous motion. This manufacturing of movement from a sequence of still images is called the Phi phenomenon, and it lies at the very foundation of how we experience moving pictures. The Phi phenomenon and the closely related experience of apparent motion demonstrate that the perception of movement is not a direct readout of things actually moving in the world. It is a construction, generated by the brain when it encounters the right pattern of changing stimulation over time. When lights flash in the right sequence, at the right speed and spacing, the brain interprets the changing pattern as a single object in motion, filling in the movement between the positions even though nothing physically traveled across the gap. The motion is added by the mind. This glitch is not a mere curiosity. It is the principle that makes film and television possible. A movie is nothing but a rapid sequence of still photographs, each slightly different from the last, presented quickly one after another. There is no motion on the screen, only a series of frozen frames. But the brain, presented with this sequence, generates the perception of smooth, continuous movement. Every moving image you have ever watched is an instance of the phi phenomenon at work, your brain conjuring fluid motion from a string of static pictures. The fact that this works so flawlessly that we never see the individual frames or notice the gaps between them shows how committed the brain is to perceiving smooth motion wherever the pattern suggests it. The visual system is exquisitely tuned to detect and construct movement because movement was so vital to our ancestors, signaling predators and prey. This tuning is so strong that the brain readily generates motion from sequences of still images, supplying the movement to complete the story. The phi phenomenon reminds us that even something as seemingly direct as the perception of motion is an interpretation rather than a simple recording. We feel that we are watching things move, plainly and obviously, but in many cases, the movement is a creation of our own minds. The boundary between real motion and constructed motion is invisible to us, the two experienced identically. The phi phenomenon is the glitch that built the entire art of cinema upon the brain's eager willingness to see motion where there is none. The placebo effect. Take a pill that contains no active medicine, nothing but sugar, believing it to be a powerful remedy, and your symptoms may genuinely improve. Your pain may lessen, your mood may lift, your body may show real, measurable changes, all triggered by nothing more than the expectation of healing. This remarkable capacity of belief to produce real physical effects is called the placebo effect, and it is one of the most astonishing demonstrations of the power of the mind over the body. The placebo effect works through the influence of expectation and belief on the body's own systems. When you believe you are receiving an effective treatment, your brain responds to that belief, setting in motion real physiological changes. It can release the body's own pain-relieving chemicals and shift the actual functioning of the body in ways that produce genuine improvement. The expectation of relief becomes a cause of relief. The effect is not imaginary. The improvements can be objectively measured, even though the trigger was a substance with no medical action of its own. The placebo effect reveals the deep and often underappreciated connection between mind and body. Our expectations do not float in some separate mental realm, disconnected from our flesh. They reach down into the body, influencing its chemistry and function. The belief that we will feel better can itself help us feel better, not through wishful thinking alone, but through the brain's power to translate expectation into physiological reality. The line between psychological and physical, which we tend to draw so firmly, turns out to be far more porous than we assume. There is also a darker mirror called the nocebo effect, in which negative expectations produce negative outcomes. Believe that a harmless substance will make you ill, and you may genuinely develop symptoms. Expect side effects, and you may experience them, even from an inert pill. The same mechanism that heals through hope can harm through dread, demonstrating that expectation is a double-edged force. The placebo effect carries profound implications for how we understand health and healing. It shows that treatment is never purely a matter of the chemicals involved, but always also involves the patient's beliefs and expectations, which exert their own real power. It complicates the testing of medicines, requiring careful methods to separate the genuine effects of a treatment from the powerful effects of belief. And it stands as a humbling reminder that the mind is not a passive observer of the body, but an active participant in its functioning. The placebo effect is the glitch that turns belief into biology. revealing that what we expect can quietly become what we experience. The anchoring bias. Before making an estimate involving numbers, we are often exposed to some initial figure, and that figure exerts a powerful and often invisible pull on our judgment, even when it is entirely arbitrary. Whatever number we encounter first becomes an anchor, dragging our subsequent estimates toward it. This tendency to be unduly influenced by an initial reference point is called the anchoring bias. The anchoring bias has been demonstrated in remarkable ways. People asked to estimate a quantity will give answers pulled toward whatever number they were exposed to beforehand, even when that number was generated randomly, even when they know it is random, even when it has no logical connection to the question. A high anchor produces high estimates, a low anchor produces low ones, and the pull persists despite people's awareness and their efforts to resist it. This happens because, when faced with uncertainty, the mind seeks a starting point from which to reason, and it readily seizes on whatever number is available, even an irrelevant one. Having anchored to that starting point, we then adjust, moving our estimate up or down toward what seems right. But the adjustment is typically too small, leaving us anchored closer to the starting point than we would be if we had reasoned without it. We believe we are reasoning freely, but we are reasoning from a point that was handed to us. The anchoring bias has enormous practical consequences, especially in negotiation and pricing. The first number mentioned in a negotiation tends to shape the entire range of the discussion that follows, which is why the opening offer carries such weight. An initial price, even an inflated one, anchors our sense of what is reasonable, making subsequent prices seem like bargains by comparison. Those who understand the bias can wield it deliberately, planting an initial number to shift the judgments of others in their favor. The anchoring bias is a sobering demonstration that our judgments are not the products of pure, independent reasoning, but are shaped by the context in which we make them, including arbitrary features of that context that should be irrelevant. The number we happen to see first leaves its mark on conclusions we believe we reached on our own. This glitch reveals the mind as far more suggestible and context-dependent than we like to imagine, anchored to whatever drifts into view. Our reasoning, it turns out, rarely starts from nothing, and where it starts shapes where it ends. The Forer effect. Read a personality description that seems to capture you with uncanny precision, that describes your inner traits and your private nature with startling accuracy, and you may feel certain it was written just for you. But hand that same description to 100 other people, and each of them will feel exactly the same way. This tendency to accept vague, general statements as highly accurate personal descriptions is called the Forer effect, or the Barnum effect, and it explains the persistent appeal of horoscopes and fortune-telling. The Forer effect works because of the way certain statements are crafted to seem specific while actually being broad enough to apply to almost anyone. A skilled description will say things like, "You have a great deal of unused potential," or, at times, "You are outgoing and sociable," while at other times, "You are reserved and cautious." These statements feel personal and revealing, but they are true of nearly everyone, describing universal human experiences in language that sounds individual. We hear our own reflection in them because they are designed to be mirrors. Several factors strengthen the effect. We tend to focus on the parts of a description that fit us and to overlook the parts that do not, finding the hits and ignoring the misses. We are more accepting of descriptions we believe were tailored specifically for us, and more accepting still when they come from an authoritative source. And we accept flattering statements more readily than unflattering ones, so descriptions that lean positive are especially persuasive. Together, these tendencies make us active collaborators in our own deception. The Forer effect explains the enduring success of practices that claim to reveal individual character through impersonal means. Horoscopes assign the same general descriptions to everyone born within a wide span of dates, yet readers find them strikingly apt. Cold readers use the same principle, offering broad statements that the listener fills in with their own specifics, then marveling at the apparent accuracy. The accuracy is supplied by the listener, not by the reader, who has merely provided a vague template. Understanding the fora effect is a valuable defense against being misled by false claims of insight into our nature. The feeling that a description fits us perfectly is not reliable evidence that it was based on any real knowledge of who we are, because that feeling can be produced by statements that fit everyone equally. The sense of being personally seen and understood, so powerful and convincing, can be manufactured with nothing more than carefully vague language. This glitch reveals how readily we find ourselves in generalities, how eager we are to be known, and how easily that eagerness can be exploited. Synesthesia. For some people, the senses do not stay in their separate channels but blend and cross so that one kind of perception automatically triggers another. They may see colors when they hear music, taste flavors when they read words, or perceive numbers and letters as inherently colored, each with its own particular hue. This automatic blending of the senses is called synesthesia, and it offers a fascinating window into how the brain organizes perception and how differently that organization can unfold from one person to another. Synesthesia comes in many forms. Some people experience colored hearing, in which sounds reliably evoke the perception of colors. Others have colored letters and numbers, perceiving each character as tinted with a specific shade that remains consistent throughout their lives. Some taste words, some feel that time or numbers occupy specific positions in space around them. The particular pairings vary from person to person, but within each individual they are remarkably stable and automatic, occurring without effort or choice, the same way every time. What makes synesthesia so intriguing is that it appears to result from unusual connections between brain regions that are normally more separate. In most people, the areas of the brain handling different senses are relatively distinct, with limited crosstalk. In synesthetes, there seems to be additional connection or interaction between these areas, so that activity in one automatically spills over into another, producing the blended experience. The brain regions for processing sound and color communicate in ways that generate the joined perception. Synesthesia is not a disorder or an impairment. Most people who have it regard it as a neutral or even pleasant feature of their experience, a richer and more interconnected way of perceiving the world. It tends to run in families, suggesting a hereditary component, and it is more common than was once believed, though many synesthetes assume their experience is universal until they discover that others do not share it. The condition reveals that the way the senses are normally partitioned is not the only possible arrangement. Beyond its intrinsic fascination, synesthesia illuminates something about all perception. It suggests that the separation of the senses, which feels so natural and absolute, is itself a product of how the brain happens to be organized, and that this organization can vary. It hints that there may be more crossover between the senses in everyone than we usually notice. The way most of us experience the world, with each sense in its own neat channel, is just one possible configuration, and synesthesia shows us another, reminding us that the architecture of perception is not fixed, but can be built in more than one way. The stereotype of the future self. When we imagine our own future selves, something strange happens in the brain. We tend to think of the person we will become not as ourselves, but almost as a stranger, a different person whose feelings and welfare we regard with a curious detachment. This tendency to treat our future self as someone other than who we are now is a subtle but consequential glitch, shaping our decisions about saving, health, and every choice whose costs fall now and whose benefits arrive later. The phenomenon shows up in how we treat the future self compared to the present one. We are often willing to burden our future self with consequences we would never accept for our present self, because the future self feels distant and abstract. We put off difficult tasks, knowing our future self will have to handle them. We indulge now and assume our future self will deal with the cost. We fail to save or prepare, because the person who will need those preparations seems like someone else, a vaguer figure whose hardships do not move us as our own immediate hardships do. This detachment appears to reflect how the brain represents the self across time. When we think about our present self, certain patterns of brain activity arise that are characteristic of self-reflection. But when some people think about their distant future self, the patterns shift toward those associated with thinking about other people, as though the future self were not the self at all. The more a person's brain treats their future self as a stranger in this way, the more they tend to neglect that future self, choosing immediate rewards over long-term well-being. This glitch has significant consequences for how we live. Many of the most important decisions we face involve trade-offs between the present and the future. If we regard our future self as a stranger, we will consistently favor the present at the expense of the future, undersaving and indulging in ways that harm the person we will become. The failure to feel that our future self is truly us leads us to treat that self carelessly. The stranger in the future pays for the choices of the self in the present. Recognizing this tendency can help us make wiser choices. When we deliberately strengthen the sense of connection to our future self, imagining that person vividly, recognizing them as genuinely ourselves rather than a distant other, we tend to treat them more kindly. The future self is not a stranger, but the continuation of who we are, the person who will inherit everything we do today. This glitch, once understood, can be partly corrected, allowing us to extend to our future self the same care we naturally give to our present one. The just world hypothesis. Deep in the human mind lies a powerful and comforting assumption that the world is fundamentally fair, that people get what they deserve and deserve what they get, that good is rewarded and bad is punished. This belief is so appealing that we cling to it even in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary, and it leads us into a troubling glitch, the tendency to blame victims for their own misfortunes. This is the just world hypothesis. The just world belief offers genuine psychological comfort. If the world is fair, then we are safe, provided we are good. Misfortune happens to those who deserve it, which means that as long as we behave well, we will be protected from harm. This belief allows us to feel secure in a world that is, in truth, full of random, undeserved suffering. To preserve this comforting sense of safety, we are motivated to see the world as more just than it is, to find reasons why those who suffer must have somehow brought it upon themselves. This motivation leads to the disturbing tendency to blame victims. When we encounter someone who has suffered a misfortune, especially one that was random and undeserved, the just world belief is threatened because their suffering suggests that bad things can happen to anyone, including us. To defend the belief and our own sense of safety, we look for ways in which the victim must have deserved their fate, must have done something to cause it. By blaming the victim, we restore the comforting illusion that the world is fair and that we, being careful and good, remain safe. The just world hypothesis distorts our judgments in many domains. It leads us to be harsher toward those who have suffered, to assume that the unfortunate have earned their misfortune. It makes us less compassionate and less willing to help, because if people deserve their suffering, then helping them is less urgent. It can even shape how victims see themselves, leading them to blame themselves for misfortunes that were not their fault. Understanding the just world hypothesis is important precisely because its effects are so often unjust. The desire to believe in a fair world is understandable, rooted in the need to feel safe. But when this desire leads us to blame the innocent for their suffering, it becomes a source of cruelty. Recognizing this glitch allows us to resist it, to extend compassion to those who suffer without demanding that they must have deserved it, to acknowledge the painful truth that the world is often not fair. Accepting this hard reality, rather than defending against it by blaming victims, is the beginning of genuine compassion. The curse of knowledge. Once you know something, it becomes remarkably difficult to imagine not knowing it, to recall what it was like before you understood. This inability to set aside what we know when trying to understand the perspective of those who do not know it is called the curse of knowledge, and it quietly sabotages communication, teaching, and our efforts to understand one another. The curse of knowledge shows up whenever an expert tries to explain something to a novice. The expert, deeply familiar with the subject, finds it nearly impossible to remember what it was like to be a beginner, to recall which things were confusing, which steps were not obvious. They skip over what seems obvious to them, use terms the novice does not understand, and assume background knowledge the novice does not have, all because they cannot fully imagine a mind without their own knowledge. The very expertise that makes them knowledgeable makes them poor at explaining. A simple and striking demonstration involves tapping out the rhythm of a well-known song and asking a listener to identify it. The tapper, hearing the full song in their head as they tap, feels certain the tune is obvious. But the listener, hearing only a series of disconnected taps without the melody, almost always fails. The tapper cannot imagine not hearing the song they know so well, and so vastly overestimates how recognizable their tapping is. The knowledge in their head fills in everything the listener lacks. The curse of knowledge has wide-ranging effects. It makes experts overestimate how clear their explanations are. It leads writers to assume readers know things they do not, teachers to move too fast for their students. It causes us to overestimate how obvious our own thoughts and intentions are to others, assuming that what is clear in our own minds must be clear to everyone. The knowledge we carry distorts our sense of what others know. Overcoming the curse of knowledge requires deliberate effort, a conscious attempt to imagine the perspective of someone who lacks our knowledge, to remember our own past ignorance. Good communicators learn to fight against the curse, checking whether they are being understood, spelling out what seems obvious, building from what the listener actually knows. The curse is never fully escaped because we cannot truly unknow what we know, but recognizing it allows us to compensate for it. It is the glitch that makes knowledge itself a barrier to sharing knowledge, and awareness of it is the first step toward better understanding. The end of history illusion. At every stage of life, people recognize that they have changed enormously in the past, that they are quite different from who they were years ago. Yet at the same time, they tend to believe that they have now essentially finished changing, that the person they are today is more or less the person they will remain. They acknowledge the dramatic changes behind them while denying the possibility of comparable changes ahead. This persistent belief that we have reached the final version of ourselves is called the end of history illusion. The illusion reveals a curious asymmetry in how we think about change across time. Looking backward, we see clearly how much our values, preferences, and lives have transformed. We remember being different, wanting different things, holding different views. But looking forward, we imagine that this process of change has largely run its course, that we will remain roughly as we are now. We treat the present as the summit, the place where change finally stops, even though every previous present felt the same way and was followed by further transformation. People of every age display this illusion. The young acknowledge how much they have changed while underestimating how much they will continue to change. The middle-aged do the same, and so do the old. At each stage, the person believes they have arrived at their final form, only to look back later and recognize that they continue to change after all. We are always at the end of our history, in our own imagination, and always proven wrong by the history yet to come. The reasons may have to do with the difference between remembering and imagining. Recalling how we have changed is relatively easy because the changes have already happened. But imagining how we will change is far harder because the future is unknown and the specific transformations have not yet occurred. Faced with this difficulty, we simply default to assuming that we will stay the same because we cannot picture the particular ways we will become different. The end of history illusion has real consequences for the choices we make. Believing that our current preferences and relationships are permanent, we may make decisions that bind our future selves in ways we will come to regret. Recognizing the illusion invites a useful humility about our own permanence, an acknowledgement that we will likely continue to change as much in the future as we have in the past. and that the self we are so certain of today is not the final self, but merely the current one, another way station on a journey that does not end where we imagine it does. Hyperbolic discounting. Offered a smaller reward now or a larger reward later, people often choose the smaller immediate reward, even when waiting would bring them considerably more. We value the present so much more than the future that we will sacrifice a greater later gain for a lesser one we can have at once. This tendency to discount the value of future rewards in a way that disproportionately favors the immediate is called hyperbolic discounting, and it lies behind much of our struggle with self-control and temptation. The peculiar feature of hyperbolic discounting is the way our preferences reverse as time passes. From a distance, we may sensibly prefer the larger later reward, recognizing that patience will pay off. But as the smaller immediate reward draws near, its value swells disproportionately, and we abandon our earlier resolve. This is why we plan to start the diet tomorrow, but indulge today, intend to save but spend, resolve to work but procrastinate. From afar, we choose wisely, but up close, the immediate reward overwhelms us. This pattern reflects the way the present exerts an outsized gravitational pull on our decisions. Rewards available right now feel vivid, concrete, and urgent, while rewards in the future feel pale and abstract. The mind weighs the immediate far more heavily than the delayed, discounting the future steeply, especially in the near term. This steep discounting of the near future, far steeper than any rational calculation would justify, is the signature of hyperbolic discounting. Hyperbolic discounting explains a great deal of human behavior that otherwise seems irrational. It accounts for why we so often fail to act in our own long-term interest, why we choose immediate pleasures that we know will cost us later. It underlies procrastination, impulsive spending, and the countless small betrayals of our own long-term goals in favor of immediate gratification. The future self, who would benefit from our patience, is consistently sacrificed to the present self. Understanding hyperbolic discounting offers tools for managing it. Because we know that our resolve will weaken as temptation approaches, we can make binding commitments in advance when our judgment is clear that constrain our future behavior. We can structure our environment to keep temptations at a distance. We can make the future rewards more vivid and concrete. These strategies work with the grain of the glitch rather than against it, acknowledging that willpower alone is unreliable. Hyperbolic discounting is the glitch that makes the future so easy to sacrifice for the present, and outsmarting it is one of the quiet arts of living well. The Dunning-Kruger effect. People who are highly incompetent at something often fail to recognize their own incompetence and may even rate their abilities as above average. Meanwhile, those who are genuinely skilled tend to underestimate themselves. This double-sided glitch, in which the unskilled are overconfident and the skilled are underconfident, is called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it reveals that the very abilities needed to do something well are often the same abilities needed to recognize how well one is doing it. The core insight is that competence and the ability to judge competence are deeply intertwined. To recognize that an answer is wrong, you often need the same knowledge required to produce the right answer. As a result, people who lack skill in an area also lack the ability to accurately assess their skill in that area. They do not know enough to know how much they do not know. Their incompetence hides itself from them, leaving them with an inflated and unjustified confidence, blind to their own deficiencies precisely because of those deficiencies. The flip side affects the genuinely competent. Skilled people, who find a task relatively easy, often assume that it must be easy for others as well, underestimating how unusual their competence actually is. They may also be more aware of the complexity of their field, more conscious of what they do not know, which makes them more humble. The combination produces a paradox in which the least able are the most confident and the most able are the most doubtful. The Dunning-Kruger effect has significant consequences in every domain where judgment and skill matter. It explains why confident incompetence is so common, why those who know the least often speak the most assuredly. It cautions us that confidence is not a reliable indicator of competence, that the strength of someone's conviction tells us little about whether they are right. It also warns us to be wary of our own confidence, particularly in areas where we know little, since our very ignorance may be hiding itself from us. The remedy lies in humility and the willingness to learn. As people gain genuine competence, they typically become better at assessing their own ability, their early overconfidence giving way to a more accurate self-assessment. Learning more not only improves our skills, but improves our ability to see our skills clearly. Seeking feedback and remaining open to the possibility that we are wrong all help to counteract the glitch. The Dunning-Kruger effect is the trap that makes ignorance invisible to itself, and escaping it begins with the recognition that the less we know, the less able we may be to judge how little we know. The illusion of transparency. When we feel a strong emotion, or when we are trying to conceal one, we often believe that our inner state is far more visible to others than it actually is. We feel that our nervousness is obvious, that our discomfort shows plainly on our face. But in truth, our inner states are far more private than we imagine. This tendency to overestimate how transparent our thoughts and feelings are to others is called the illusion of transparency. The illusion arises because we have such intense, direct access to our own inner states that we struggle to imagine those states being invisible to others. Our emotions feel so vivid from the inside that we cannot quite believe they are not equally apparent from the outside. When we are anxious, the anxiety dominates our experience so completely that it seems impossible others could fail to notice it. When we tell a lie, our awareness of the deception feels so loud in our own minds that we are sure it must be written on our face. The reality is that others have access only to our outward behavior, not to the rich inner experience driving it. And the outward signs of our inner states are usually far subtler than we feel them to be. The nervousness that feels overwhelming inside may produce only the faintest external signs, easily missed by observers focused on their own concerns. The effort to conceal an emotion usually succeeds far better than we believe, because the emotion was never as visible as our inner experience suggested. The illusion of transparency has practical consequences, particularly in situations involving anxiety. People giving speeches feel that their nervousness is glaringly obvious to the audience, when in fact it is usually barely detectable, and this false belief can worsen the anxiety, creating a spiral. People trying to hide their feelings exhaust themselves worrying that they are failing when their concealment is actually working fine. Recognizing the illusion can relieve a great deal of this needless distress. The illusion of transparency, like the spotlight effect to which it is related, reflects the fundamental difficulty of escaping our own perspective. We are trapped inside our own experience, with its vivid emotions and loud inner voice, and we cannot easily grasp how opaque that experience is to everyone else. We project our inner visibility onto an outer world that cannot actually see it. Understanding this glitch grants us a measure of freedom, the reassurance that our private struggles remain private, that the feelings we wish to hide are usually hidden. Our inner life, for better and for worse, remains our own. The recency and primacy effects. When we try to recall a list of items or the points made in a conversation, we do not remember them all equally. We tend to remember the first items especially well, and the last items especially well, while the items in the middle fade and blur. The advantage given to the first items is called the primacy effect, and the advantage given to the last items is called the recency effect, and together they shape memory in ways that distort our recollection of everything. These two effects arise from different aspects of how memory works. The primacy effect, the strong memory for early items, occurs because the first items in a sequence receive more attention and more opportunity for rehearsal. When the list begins, we have spare mental capacity and we process the early items deeply, transferring them into more durable memory. As the list goes on and more items accumulate, our capacity is overwhelmed and the later items receive less of this deep processing. The early items stick, while the middle items, processed more shallowly, fade. The recency effect occurs for a different reason. The last items in a sequence are still fresh in our immediate memory, still lingering in the mind's temporary holding space when we are asked to recall them. They have not yet been displaced by anything else, and so they are easily retrieved. But this advantage is fragile. If a delay intervenes between the sequence and the recall, the recency effect tends to vanish, while the primacy effect, resting on more durable memory, survives. The two effects thus depend on different memory systems, one lasting and one fleeting. The combination produces a characteristic pattern in which the beginning and end of any sequence are remembered well and the middle is remembered poorly. In a list of names, the first and last are recalled best. In a presentation, the opening and closing are remembered while the middle blurs. The shape of the sequence determines what survives in memory, privileging the edges and neglecting the center. These effects have important practical implications. The first impression we make carries disproportionate weight, lodging firmly in memory through the primacy effect, which is why beginnings matter so much. The final impression also lingers through the recency effect, which is why endings are remembered. Those who understand these effects place their most important points at the beginning and end, where they will be best retained. The primacy and recency effects reveal that memory is not an even recording, but a curved one, bending toward the edges of experience, remembering where things started and where they ended, while quietly losing much of what happened in between. The halo effect. When we form an impression of a person based on one positive quality, that single quality tends to spill over and color our judgment of all their other qualities, leading us to assume they possess a whole range of good traits we have no evidence for. A person who is attractive is assumed to be kind, intelligent, and trustworthy. This tendency for one good trait to cast a flattering glow over our entire impression of someone is called the halo effect. The halo effect works by allowing a single salient characteristic to dominate our overall impression, which we then extend to other unrelated characteristics. If our first and strongest impression of someone is positive, perhaps because they are good-looking or charming, that positive impression radiates outward, inclining us to view everything else about them favorably. We assume that a person who excels in one respect must be admirable in others, that good qualities cluster together. The halo of the one trait we have observed brightens all the traits we have not. This bias operates largely beneath our awareness, which is what makes it so influential. We do not consciously decide that an attractive person must also be intelligent. The judgment happens automatically, the positive impression coloring our perception without our noticing the leap we have made. We then experience our favorable view of the person's other qualities as if it were based on genuine evidence, when in fact, it was generated by the halo effect. The inference feels like observation, but it is projection. The halo effect has powerful consequences in many areas of life. Attractive people are treated more favorably in countless situations, judged as more capable and more honest, simply because their appearance generates a positive halo. First impressions, often based on superficial qualities, shape our entire view of a person. And once the halo is in place, it is difficult to dislodge. The effect influences hiring, evaluation, and judgment of every kind. There is also a negative counterpart, sometimes called the horn effect, in which a single negative trait casts an unfavorable shadow over our entire impression, leading us to assume a range of bad qualities from one observed flaw. Together, the halo and horn effects reveal how readily our impressions of people are distorted by single salient traits, how poorly we separate one quality from another. Recognizing the halo effect can help us judge people more fairly, reminding us that one good or bad quality tells us little about the others, and that the glow or shadow cast by a first impression is a trick of perception rather than a reflection of the whole person. The framing effect. The way a choice or a piece of information is presented, the words used, the perspective taken, profoundly influences how we judge it and what we decide, even when the underlying facts are identical. The same option can seem attractive or unattractive, depending entirely on how it is framed. This powerful influence of presentation over substance is called the framing effect. The framing effect is demonstrated when the same information is described in different but equivalent ways, producing different reactions. A medical treatment described in terms of its survival rate seems more appealing than the same treatment described in terms of its mortality rate, even though the two descriptions convey identical facts. A food described as 90% fat-free seems healthier than the same food described as 10% fat. In each case, the substance is the same, but the framing shifts our judgment, leading us to prefer one description over another that means exactly the same thing. This happens because we do not respond to facts in the abstract, but to the way facts are presented, and the frame activates particular associations, emotions, and reference points. A frame emphasizing gains makes us think in terms of what we will get, while a frame emphasizing losses makes us think in terms of what we will avoid losing, and these different orientations lead to different choices. We believe we are responding to the facts, but we are responding to the packaging. The framing effect is closely tied to the way we feel about gains and losses. We tend to be more affected by potential losses than by equivalent gains, so frames that present something as a loss carry more emotional weight than frames that present the same thing as a foregone gain. This asymmetry means that the choice of frame can powerfully steer our decisions simply by casting an option in terms of what we might gain or what we might lose. The framing effect has enormous practical importance, influencing decisions in health, finance, politics, and marketing. It means that the presentation of information is never neutral, that how something is framed always shapes how it is received. Recognizing the framing effect is a valuable defense, allowing us to look past the packaging to the underlying substance, to reframe options for ourselves in different terms to check whether our reaction holds. It is the glitch that makes presentation as powerful as substance, reminding us that in the human mind, how something is said can matter as much as what is said. The confirmation bias. Once we hold a belief, we tend to seek out, notice, and remember information that supports it, while overlooking, dismissing, or forgetting information that contradicts it. We are not impartial evaluators of evidence, but interested parties hoping to confirm what we already think. This pervasive tendency to favor information that confirms our existing beliefs is called the confirmation bias, and it is one of the most powerful glitches in human reasoning. The confirmation bias operates at every stage of how we handle information. When we search for evidence, we tend to look in places likely to confirm what we already believe. When we encounter evidence, we scrutinize information that contradicts our beliefs far more critically than information that supports them. When we remember, we recall confirming instances more easily than disconfirming ones. At each step, the bias tilts the process toward confirmation, ensuring that our existing beliefs are continually reinforced and rarely seriously challenged. This bias is so powerful because it feels like nothing at all. We do not experience ourselves as cherry-picking evidence. We experience ourselves as simply observing the world, which seems to keep confirming what we already think. The selectivity happens beneath awareness, so that the steady stream of confirming evidence appears to be an objective feature of reality rather than a product of our own biased attention. We become more and more certain of our beliefs, not because the evidence genuinely warrants it, but because we have been unconsciously filtering the evidence. The confirmation bias has profound consequences for how beliefs form and persist. It allows false beliefs to survive and strengthen despite contradicting evidence. It deepens disagreements as people on opposite sides of an issue each gather confirming evidence for their own view and dismiss the other sides. It creates echo chambers, in which we surround ourselves with confirming voices and avoid challenging ones. The bias makes us overconfident and resistant to correction, all while feeling perfectly reasonable. Combating the confirmation bias requires deliberate effort because it runs against the natural grain of the mind. We must actively seek out information that challenges our beliefs, deliberately consider the strongest arguments against our own position, and treat confirming evidence with the same skepticism we apply to disconfirming evidence. We must cultivate the difficult habit of genuinely entertaining the possibility that we are wrong. The bias can never be fully eliminated, but awareness of it and conscious effort against it can loosen its grip. The confirmation bias is the glitch that turns the mind into an advocate for its own beliefs rather than an impartial judge of truth. The negativity bias. Bad experiences affect us more powerfully than good ones. A single criticism can outweigh many compliments. A negative event can ruin a day filled with positive ones. We attend more to threats than to opportunities. Remember bad experiences more vividly than good ones and are shaped more deeply by our losses than by our gains. This tendency for negative things to have a greater impact on us than equivalent positive things is called the negativity bias. The negativity bias is rooted in our evolutionary history. For our ancestors, attending to negative information, to threats and dangers, was often a matter of life and death. The cost of missing a threat could be fatal, while the cost of missing an opportunity was usually less severe. A creature that ignored a lurking predator did not survive, while one that missed a meal might find another. So the mind evolved to give negative information priority, to react to it more strongly, to remember it more durably. We have inherited this bias, finely tuned for a dangerous world, and it operates in us still, even when the threats it responds to are minor or imagined. The bias shows up across many aspects of mental life. Negative emotions tend to be more intense and more attention-grabbing than positive ones. Bad impressions form more quickly and prove harder to overcome than good ones. Losses feel more painful than equivalent gains feel pleasurable. Criticism stings more than praise soothes. In each case, the negative carries more weight, leaving a deeper mark. The negativity bias has significant effects on our well-being. It can make us dwell on the negative aspects of our lives while taking the positive for granted. It can distort our memories, making the bad moments stand out while the good ones fade. It can make us more fearful and more easily distressed than our actual circumstances warrant, because the negative looms so much larger than the positive in our minds. It can poison relationships, as a few negative interactions outweigh many positive ones. Understanding the negativity bias can help us counteract its distorting influence. Knowing that the negative naturally looms larger, we can make a deliberate effort to attend to the positive, to savor good experiences, to give them the weight they deserve. We can recognize that our strong reactions to bad events may be exaggerated by the bias. We can remind ourselves that the good in our lives is real and significant even when the bad captures our attention. The negativity bias is the glitch that makes the bad feel bigger than the good, a survival mechanism that often outlives its usefulness, and recognizing it allows us to find a fairer balance between the darkness that grabs our attention and the light that we so easily overlook.
The spacing effect and the forgetting curve. Information learned and then never revisited fades from memory with surprising speed, slipping away along a steep curve of forgetting that strips away most of what we learned within a remarkably short time. Yet the same information, when revisited at spaced intervals over time, becomes durable, lodging in memory far more firmly than it would through any amount of cramming. These two related phenomena reveal how memory actually works and why so much of what we learn slips away. The forgetting curve describes the way memory fades over time when no effort is made to reinforce it. After learning something, we begin to forget it almost immediately, and the loss is steep at first, with much of the material gone within hours or days. The curve then levels off, the remaining traces fading more slowly. Most of what we encounter, if we do nothing to reinforce it, simply disappears. This relentless forgetting is not a flaw so much as a feature, a way of clearing out information that is not used and therefore presumed unimportant. The spacing effect describes the remedy. When learning is spread out over time, with the material revisited at intervals rather than crammed all at once, it is retained far better. Each time we revisit the material after some forgetting has begun, the act of retrieving it strengthens the memory, making it more durable. Spacing the repetitions, allowing some forgetting to occur between them, produces stronger and longer-lasting memory than massing all the study together. The struggle to recall something partly forgotten does more to cement it than effortless review. This reveals an important truth about how memory is built. Memory is not strengthened simply by exposure, but by retrieval. by the effort of bringing information back to mind after it has begun to fade. Each successful retrieval reinforces the memory, and retrievals spaced over time build far more durable knowledge than repeated exposure all at once. Cramming may produce a temporary illusion of mastery, but the knowledge fades quickly, while spaced practice produces real, lasting retention. These principles have enormous practical value for anyone trying to learn and remember. They explain why cramming for an examination produces knowledge that evaporates soon after, and why space study produces knowledge that endures. They suggest that to learn something lastingly, we should revisit it repeatedly over time, embracing the effort of recalling what we have partly forgotten. The forgetting curve and the spacing effect together reveal that memory is shaped not by how much we encounter information, but by how we revisit it, and that working with the natural rhythms of forgetting and retrieval, rather than against them, is the key to remembering what we wish to keep.
The peak-end rule. When we look back on an experience and judge how good or bad it was, we do not average all the moments together. Instead, our overall impression is dominated by just two moments: the most intense point of the experience, its peak, and the way it ended. The rest of the experience, its duration and the texture of its other moments, matters far less to our memory than these two decisive points. This curious way of summarizing experiences is called the peak-end rule. The peak-end rule reveals a striking disconnect between the experience we actually live through and the experience we remember. As we live through an event, we feel each moment in turn, and the total experience is the sum of all those moments. But when we remember the event afterward, we do not retain this full record. Instead, our memory compresses the experience into an impression weighted heavily toward the peak and the end, while neglecting most of what happened in between. The remembered experience is not a faithful summary of the lived one. One of the most surprising consequences is that the duration of an experience has remarkably little effect on how we remember it, a phenomenon sometimes called duration neglect. A longer period of discomfort may be remembered as no worse or even better than a shorter one if the longer period ends more gently. Because the ending weighs so heavily and the duration so lightly, how an experience concludes can matter more to our memory than how long it lasted or how much total discomfort it contained. This glitch has profound implications for how we evaluate and choose our experiences. Because we make decisions based on our memories of past experiences rather than on the experiences themselves, the peak-end rule shapes our future choices through its distortion of the past. We may choose to repeat experiences that ended well, even if they were mostly unpleasant, and avoid experiences that ended badly, even if they were mostly good. Our remembering self, which makes the decisions, can be at odds with our experiencing self. Understanding the peak-end rule offers insight into the relationship between living and remembering. It suggests that endings carry special weight, that how things conclude shapes how they are remembered out of all proportion to their length. This knowledge can be used thoughtfully, attending to how experiences end, recognizing that a good ending can redeem a difficult experience in memory, while a bad ending can spoil a good one. It also invites a certain wariness about our own memories, a recognition that our recollection of an experience is not a fair account of what we actually lived through, but a summary shaped by a few decisive moments.
Semantic satiation. Repeat a word over and over, many times in quick succession, and it begins to lose its meaning. The familiar word becomes a strange, hollow sound, a meaningless cluster of noises that no longer seems to refer to anything. You may even begin to doubt that it is a real word at all. This temporary loss of meaning through repetition is called semantic satiation, and it offers a striking demonstration of how the connection between words and their meanings is something the brain actively maintains, and something that can be temporarily worn out. Semantic satiation occurs because the act of understanding a word involves activating a particular pattern of neural activity that links the word to its meaning. Each time you encounter or produce the word, this pattern fires. But neurons that fire repeatedly in rapid succession become temporarily fatigued, their responses weakening with each repetition. After enough repetitions, the connection between the word and its meaning becomes exhausted, and the word is stripped of the meaning that normally accompanies it. You are left with the bare sound of the word, disconnected from the sense that usually clothes it. This phenomenon reveals that the meaning of a word is not an inherent property of the word itself, but something generated by the brain each time the word is processed. We tend to think of words as simply having meanings, as though the meaning were contained within the word like water in a cup. But semantic satiation shows that the meaning is actively produced by the brain, conjured anew each time we encounter the word, and that this production can falter when the relevant neural machinery is fatigued. The link between symbol and sense, which feels so automatic and permanent, is in fact an ongoing process. Semantic satiation is closely related to the broader experience of jamais vu, the sense that something familiar has become strange. When a word loses its meaning through repetition, it becomes unfamiliar. A known thing turns suddenly unknown. The same underlying principle, the fatiguing of recognition systems through overuse, produces both the loss of a word's meaning and the eerie sense of strangeness that accompanies it. The phenomenon is temporary and harmless, the meaning returning as soon as the fatigued connections recover, usually within moments. But it offers a valuable glimpse into the constructed nature of meaning. It reminds us that the smooth, effortless understanding of language, which we take entirely for granted, rests on continuous neural activity that generates meaning moment by moment. When that activity is disrupted, even briefly, the meaning vanishes, and we are left staring at a word we know perfectly well, unable to feel what it means. Semantic satiation is the small glitch that reveals the hidden labor behind comprehension, work that we never notice until repetition briefly wears it out and the meaning slips away. The doorway effect. You walk into a room with a clear purpose, intending to fetch something, and the moment you cross the threshold, the purpose evaporates. You stand in the room, bewildered, unable to remember why you came. The intention that was perfectly clear a moment ago in the other room has simply vanished. This common and faintly comic experience is called the doorway effect, and it reveals something surprising about how memory is organized around the contexts in which we form our intentions. The doorway effect occurs because passing through a doorway, moving from one environment to another, seems to act as a kind of boundary that the mind uses to segment experience. As you move from one place to another, your brain treats the transition as the end of one episode and the beginning of a new one, and in doing so, it may set aside the mental contents associated with the previous environment, including the intention you were carrying. The doorway becomes an event boundary, and crossing it can flush the contents of working memory that were tied to the place you just left. This reveals that memory is deeply tied to context and location, that our intentions and thoughts are bound up with the environments in which we form them. The plan to fetch something, formed in one room, is associated with that room, and when we leave the room, the association is disrupted and the plan can slip away. This is why the forgotten intention often returns the moment we go back to the original room, where the context that supported the memory is restored. The environment held the memory, and returning to it brings the memory back. The doorway effect is part of a broader pattern in which the contexts and boundaries of experience shape what we remember. The mind organizes the continuous flow of experience into discrete episodes, often divided at moments of transition, and these divisions affect the accessibility of memories. Information associated with one episode can become harder to access once we have crossed into a new one. Doorways are just one kind of boundary, but they are a particularly common one, which is why the experience of forgetting our purpose upon entering a room is so familiar. Though the doorway effect can be momentarily frustrating, it is a benign and even sensible feature of how memory works, a side effect of the useful tendency to organize experience into manageable episodes. The same segmenting that occasionally costs us a forgotten intention also helps us structure the endless stream of experience. Understanding the doorway effect can spare us a little self-reproach when we forget why we entered a room, reassuring us that the lapse is not a sign of failing memory, but a normal consequence of how the mind partitions experience at the boundaries we cross. It is the small glitch that empties our hands of purpose as we step through a door, a quiet reminder that our memories are anchored to the places where